This content was created purely for entertainment and informational purposes. The creators of this vlog do not endorse drinking and driving, debauchery, underage drinking, public intoxication, speeding, street racing or any other form of delinquency. I'm just a guy, with a drink, talking about cars. Please don't take this too seriously.
Back once again, it's your boy, the Killer Bee, the Fat Man, the Africanized Honeybee, the Car Guy Blog 05 at gmail.com, guy at 05car on Instagram, at 05car on Threads, at 05car on Facebook. Twitter is gone. I'm flying solo today, and I'm doing something that I don't like to do, but I need to do it. It's MCU rant time. I just finished watching Secret Invasion. I liked Secret Invasion. Was it the greatest TV show of all time? No. Was it appointment television for me? Yes. Every Wednesday, I look forward to watching that show. And maybe that's not the highest bar in the world, but there's very few things that I look forward to seeing every week, and it was one of them. So there's that. But here's the thing. Everybody's like, oh, this is the worst show ever. Oh, I didn't watch it. Oh, blah, 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 blah. At this point, I think there are people who are just complaining for the sake of complaining, because the DCEU went down the toilet and Marvel has lately had front runner energy where they've been winning so much that people are just starting to hate on them just to hate on them. Because realistically, you can say whatever you want about the movie numbers, and numbers have been down, but a lot of movie numbers have been down. I mean, the second Shazam movie didn't do well. Black Adam didn't do well. What else came out recently? The Flash movie didn't do well. So, that may not just be a Marvel thing. But the biggest issue I see with Marvel is that not that the movies are demonstrably bad, it's that the movies aren't what people want them to be. As if the writers sit in a room and say, let's figure out exactly what 420 million people around the world want to see and write that exact story simultaneously. That's not how these things work. And it's like the Black Widow movie. Yes, Black Widow's popular. Yes, everybody wanted to see a Black Widow movie, but production schedules are what they are. I'm sure Scarlett Johansson wanted that on a contract where she was being paid to be the star of the movie, not a 7-picture deal where she was going to be a bit player in several movies. I'm sure she already had other commitments for movies like Lucy and some of the other things she did in the interim, Ghost in the Shell. And also with the MCU's production schedule, I don't know where they would have squeezed in a Black Widow movie early on. So the fact that we got the movie when we did is just the realities of Hollywood and making movies. Sorry. They figured out that you wanted it, but it takes a little while to load things in the pipeline and get them out the other side, especially with a global pandemic jumping in on that action in the in-between. So let's go back to the beginning. As I've mentioned before, I've been in the comic book game a long time. At the time of this recording in the summer of 2023, I am approximately 49 years old, which means I've been reading comic books for 45 years, and I've been reading Marvel comic books for just over 40 years. My father introduced me to the Chris Claremont X-Men with issue 183. So that was like the summer of 1984. That's a long time ago. And I had already been reading G.I. Joe and Star Wars at the point where I got introduced to the X-Men. A friend of mine let me read their copy of Secret Wars. So I was aware of some of the other characters around the Marvel Universe. And of course, I already knew Spider-Man and the Hulk and Fantastic Four because they had bled in from pop culture. So, with the advent in the 2010s of these scanned DVD-ROMs of comic book pages like, 40 Years of X-Men and all those DVDs that came out, and with the CBR files that were available shortly thereafter, I mean, I've read, Iron Man from like the 1970s in through the mid-90s. I read Captain America back when it was still Captain America and the Falcon, because that comic used to be co-billed as Captain America and the Falcon. So through the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, I read Guardians of the Galaxy going back to their original appearance in 1969 all the way through their early 90s run. I've read most of the big event comics and their tie-in branch comics. So we're talking about Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, House of M, Original Sin, Civil War, Age of Ultron. The first Secret Wars, the second Secret Wars, the Captain America John Walker story arc, the first Armor Wars story arc. Rhodey was still Iron Man when I started reading Marvel Comics in 1984. I've read old back issues of Iron Man where he still had the roller skates. Yeah, that. The Red and Silver Iron Man, Stain International, Roxanne Oil, The Serpent Crown, The Cosmic Cube, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, Michael Korvac. All of that stuff that I've been exposed to over, these 45 years or so of reading Marvel Comics. And really, that's the biggest problem with the MCU, because you notice I didn't mention the Fantastic Four, really. I didn't mention deep Avengers storylines because those weren't comics I read. Power Man and Iron Fist, She-Hulk, Black Panther. There were all these other things going on that I wasn't really into. Moon Knight, So one of the issues is that people like myself who have this quasi-encyclopedia knowledge of the full breadth and depth of comic book history, and maybe not every single title, every single book, forever, but I have the resources and the ability to go back and research things and look up stuff. So when Fantastic Four and X-Men finally got folded into the Disney umbrella, we were like, yeah, okay, now we get the whole story. But here's the thing. The story combinations are almost endless at this point. The current MCU basically starts when Captain America falls in the ice, and then when he wakes up in the 2000s, and they skip everything in between, basically. So in the comic books, we know that he's frozen in 45 and awakes in the 60s, and really in the in-between, there were the fake Captain Americas, the William Burnsides and the Grand Directors, and the Spirit of 76, the Patriot, the Grand Director. These other people that was retconned that were acting as Captain America while Steve Rogers was frozen in the ice. The MCU has not touched on any of that stuff. So when Red Guardian was talking about the Captain America that he fought, was he actually full of shit? Or did he fight a fake stand-in Captain America at some point that the rest of the world doesn't know about? Because these things happened in the comic books. Where in World War II, where Bucky is a teenager, not Cap's best friend. He's the camp mascot and the son of a soldier who had died. We got a version of Zemo, but we don't have Heinrich Zemo. We've got what is essentially Helmet Zemo. So we don't have the World War II era Baron Zemo. We didn't get World War II Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. Instead, we got a Captain America version of the Howling Commandos. So there are places with the multiversal concept now where you could split out and do different time periods. You could go back to the 60s and have a 60s where there was a freshly thought out Captain America, a Fantastic Four, and an X-Men, and a brand new Teenage Spider-Man. You could move around into the 80s and 90s and have different periods of different times, because with the multiverse, these are all alternate realities or alternate Earths. So you can do that and have new actors take on the roles as characters we know, but have a slightly different slant on the story, or have origin stories that more closely align to the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko era of Marvel Comics, where, Namor first appeared in World War II as the first mutant and then later became an Avenger, or where you had the Invaders, or you had Union Jack fighting in World War I and then World War II, or, the Invaders, the All-Winter Squad, the Wizard, Miss America, the original Human Torch, the android Human Torch, and his sidekick Toro. All these different iterations. Tony Stark and James Rhodes in Vietnam. The original X-Men, the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, the Beyonder, Phoenix, Dark Phoenix, all of these things that could be. And a lot of times people build these headcanons in their head of what they want the universe to be. When I found out we were going to get Infinity Gauntlet or some version of the Infinity Gauntlet. I was like, ooh, how are they going to do this? Because they don't have Adam Warlock and they don't have Silver Surfer and blah, 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 blah. And so that story changed. The Infinity War and Endgame comics we got were so different from the Infinity Gauntlet story in the comic books that it's ridiculous. But it was still fun. So there are people who want the movies to recreate the exact stories, beat for beat, line for line, as they existed in the comic books, which just isn't realistic because those stories have already been told. But what if we were to go back and do versions of those stories set in the eras in which they were set? You know, what if we got a Mohawk Storm in the 80s, and I'm not talking about that cheap knockoff version that Fox did. I'm talking about the real deal of Storm and the X-Men as in her punk rock 80s garb with the Mohawk and all. Or, you know, there's so many different ways they could go. A Carol Danvers who loses her powers to Rogue and then becomes Binary and then becomes Warbird and then becomes, you know, there's so many different directions we could go. And I think a lot of times as people want only what they want. And instead of taking a story for what it is and watching a series for what it is, they compare it to their headcanon and say, it's not what I wanted it to be, therefore it sucks. And that's just not reality. I mean, you know, it's that whole spoiled for choice thing. And maybe it's a perspective thing and an age thing because I grew up at a time, you know, I can still remember having 3 channels on VHF and 2 channels on UHF and turning the channel with a butter knife stuck in a broken off dial on a console TV sitting on the floor, or adjusting rabbit ears, or the idea that even when we did have cable, sometime cable went out in the middle of the day because the satellite was behind the sun. The sun was directly behind the satellite and it interfered with the signal. Or the idea that some channels were only on half a day. Like I can remember when MTV was a half day channel. Or sitting at grandma's house, and because there was only one TV in the den, we were all sitting around and we had to watch what grandma wanted to watch, which meant watching Gilligan's Island's rerun and I Dream of Jeannie instead of, you know, our favorite Thundercats or Transformers or G.I. Joe cartoons or whatever. So all of this to say that people need to have some perspective and just like come to some realizations about things. And you notice I conveniently skipped over the whole culture war wokeness thing because here's my take on that. You know, movie and TVs have always been topical. And at various times in the history, certainly of the history of the United States, there have been shows and movies that were more controversial or more political than others. And I'm talking about the 60s and 70s, or 50s, 60s, 70s, things like husband and wife sleeping in the same bed. Ooh, too political. A woman being pregnant on TV. Too political. Interracial kiss. Way too political. Single mom. Ooh, no, taboo topic. Interracial marriage. A man pretending to be, one of the favorite sitcoms when I was a kid was a man who was pretending to be gay to share an apartment with 2 women because the landlord wouldn't let a straight man live in an apartment with 2 women. That was called Three's Company, by the way. So overtly political or social commentary just in the premise of the show. We're talking about TV shows that talked about a white man adopting his black maid's 2 children when she died from the ghetto. That was called Different Strokes. It was in the 80s. Look it up. Gary Coleman. Abortion. Renegade cops. Renegade truckers. Vietnam. How many TV shows and movies addressed Vietnam in some form or another as a means of talking about how horrible the Vietnam era was, whether they wrapped it or reframed it in another mode or not, i.e. the TV show MASH was really a commentary on the Vietnam War, even though it was wrapped in the facade of the Korean conflict. Government conspiracies, communists in America. Fictional media has always been political and topical and reflective of the issues of the day. So, I mean, we're talking all the way back to Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, Roots, all, what was the stupid Civil War era epic, North and South or whatever it was. The Day After, you know, the most terrifying miniseries or TV movie in the history of the world because it tried to realistically depict a post-nuclear America, and it wasn't pretty. So all these things to say that there have always been politics and topical subjects in media because writers write what they know, which is the world that they see and the world that they have experienced around them. And there's always going to be somebody that's mad about that. Always. Nancy Reagan had her panties in a bunch when I was a little kid. Tipper Gore was all wound up about music and TV and movies when I was in high school. Somebody's always mad about something, and which end of the political spectrum they're on doesn't really matter because there's always going to be people that's mad about that. So I tend to discount all that shit. So everybody that talks about the MCU and too much, they're pushing their politics in my face, blah, 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 blah. That shit's always been around and it's always going to be around. And usually the only time people disagree with that is when the politics aren't their politics. So I'm setting all that shit aside and we're moving on to something else. It is fine to be critical of media. That's a thing. But piling on TV shows from a certain brand just because they're not what you want them to be, not that they're bad, not that they're objectively poorly written or poorly plotted, or don't follow the conventions of their storytelling type, because guess what? When you have a solo topic in a comic book series, comic book movie, and why aren't the Avengers there? Why aren't the X-Men there? Why didn't somebody call the Fantastic Four? Hello, because it's a solo title. That's the whole point. There's always going to be a makeshift reason why they couldn't call out the big guns this time. That's how solo stories work. That's a comic book trope, has been since the beginning, always will be. So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't feel like a lot of the criticism that's coming at the MCU right now is about actual criticism. I think it's hating because of front running. Like when the Yankees used to win all the time, suddenly people hated the Yankees. When the Bulls were winning all the time, people hated the Bulls. When the Patriots were winning all the time, people started hating the Patriots. They're mad because the MCU has been beating the holy hell out of DC, and the DC fans have just become so despondent that there's nothing else to do except point fingers at the MCU and say, your stuff sucks. Nothing's been good since Endgame. It took 11 years to build up to Endgame. And oh, by the way, that's a story peak. Now we go back to the trough and we start again and building up from scratch, just like we did in phase 1. And the people that can't see that don't want to see it. They're just angry for the sake of being angry. And again, on some culture war bullshit, or just lack the perspective to understand that these things are always going to be cyclical. And people who swear that episode 6 of WandaVision or Falcon and Winter Soldier or She-Hulk or Hawkeye or Secret Invasion or Miss Marvel or any of these shows are the worst show ever made probably has not seen an episode of Cop Rock or Homeboys in Outer Space. And I've lived through both of those shits. And let me tell you, the MCU couldn't dare to sink to a level of that bad of episodic television. Trust me. With that, I'm out. Hey, folks, enjoy the ride. I don't have any Patreon or PayPal or anything. So, just Venmo me the money. I'm at so just Venmo me the money and it'll be what it be. But anyway, that's my rant for the day. I'm out. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not saying people can't be critical of shows, but it irks me that people will go onto a thread for Marvel or for an MCU show and just proceed to shit on the show. Like, okay, clearly you're not a fan, so why are you in our room? Go to the shitpost board. Go to Reddit or somewhere. Don't come in here with that. We're being happy and celebrating our show, and you're coming to shit all over it. And usually you're not even bringing actual critiques. You're just saying, this is the worst show ever. What the is that? Anyway, okay, I'm done. I got other things to do. Holla at your boy. Killer be out.